All right, so welcome to applying the final touches. This particular workshop is designed for students who are looking for some strategies for their final assignment of the semester. Most of the big aspects of the writing have already taken place, and so tonight we're really just kind of focusing on what can we do more in the editing phase of the writing. If you are interested in other topics, on our YouTube channel, we have lots of other workshops where we outline other things like the APA format or the writing process, meaning like how do you even get started. We have a really fantastic workshop led by a librarian about how to use the USD library and the databases for research writing. And that workshop is offered again in the spring semester. So you can definitely sign up for that if that's something that you feel like you could benefit from. So without much further ado, I'm going to let you know what we're going to try and work on tonight is just some very discrete skills. I think at this time in the semester, people are pretty saturated with a lot of information, and it's kind of hard to take in anything new. So I'm going to try and make the workshop really simple and really applicable to what it is that's right in front of you this week and next week, okay? I'll give you some resources to help you with any of the final stages of a writing project, and then offer you a systematic way of approaching the writing, revision, and editing, right? So, and as I go through the slides, these things will make a little more sense to you. And if you have any questions, just jump in and ask me. All right. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna keep my microphone off just because we're recording. I don't want my kids to jump in or whatever, so I'll just keep it quiet.
Sounds good. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna talk about a couple of things, but I'm gonna try and keep things pretty accessible so that you walk away really having a clear understanding without feeling like you were overwhelmed. So the writing process is one thing that it's really important we understand at a foundational level. What are we talking about here? And then, the difference between editing and proofreading, some specific strategies. And as I move through the slides, there are activities in the slide, and feel free to jump in or not jump in. It's up to you. And then I just do sort of just like a wrap up of like, well, what are the main takeaways? And then at the end, if you have questions that you didn't get to ask, let me know. If you have something specific in a piece of writing that you would like to workshop, maybe you've been struggling with, is this the right conclusion or is this the best introduction? We can talk about that too. All right, so to jump in. So it's important that we understand the difference between revision and editing, and that there is a whole lifespan to writing, and that, there's just the idea generation, which happens before you even begin typing, before you begin writing. And that is also part of the process. And if enough time hasn't been committed to the thinking, then some of the writing, the ideas, and the organization of ideas can suffer from that. So that's why I want to make sure that folks are understanding the difference between revision and editing. When you have a piece of work where you really need to think more clearly about the development of your ideas, if you're doing a case study, did you provide enough examples, right? And another feature of revision is, how did you lay out the information? What came first, what came second, and what came last? These are really important decisions. At the graduate level, we are looking at you for demonstrating expertise in something. So there has to be some methodology to how it is you've made different decisions. And so at the revision stage, it's really much more about, did I expand this idea? Did I provide enough examples? Did I integrate external sources to support what I'm arguing? And how did I arrange this? And do the pieces sort of fall together? If you think about like maybe like a chandelier or even a skeleton, like there's an order to things. They line up, right? And sometimes if we haven't devoted enough attention to the alignment of the writing, does one idea organically flow into the next idea, or is there just like a hard transition? So those kinds of things are really much more at a revision stage, like if you think about it, your house, there's a difference between doing a renovation of your house and redecorating your house, right? One is, this is structural, things are going to look different. And the other one is a little more surface, a little more cosmetic. And tonight, what I'm going to focus on is really much more of the lighter stuff, the editing, much more of that, less of the heavy stuff. But I also like this workshop to be something that you can do pretty quickly and painlessly if you are facing a hard deadline. So let's say that you have a paper that's due tomorrow. If you do the things that I'm talking about tonight, you'll have a decent paper. You'll make it appear that you paid attention, you were trying to make an effort, as opposed to I just turned in as far as I got. So let's move into what those are. So I always provide a schematic of the writing process, because I think that, unless you're an English person, English writer, you're not necessarily thinking about the writing process, and that it doesn't just go from a point A to point B. It's a recursive and iterative process where there's thinking and planning and drafting and getting reflection or getting feedback, and then it folds back in on itself, and it can loop, and it can loop, and it can loop, and it can loop before it gets to the more final stage of things. And just to reiterate, tonight I'm really focusing much more on the tail end of the writing process. Okay, so just some of those takeaways to reinforce to people who feel little, maybe some anxiety around the writing process. I want to just reassure that, writing, it happens in stages. It's recursive, it's iterative, sort of fits and starts, but ultimately believe that it improves. The more writing you do, the better that it becomes. It just does, because you're getting feedback constantly and you're thinking. And when you come to graduate school, there is the possibility that you haven't been doing intensive writing for a while. So it's going to take time to get back into the rhythm of what it entails. So the things that I want to talk about tonight for strategies, and these are strategies for again, you're really at the end stages. You just want to make sure that things are as polished as possible. So I'm going to talk about introduction, conclusion, topic sentences, conciseness, and then formatting. And these four things, if you really are like, I don't even know where to start, and this paper's due in a few hours, if you tackle these four things, you will have a presentable paper, right? So when it comes to the introduction, if you are in the final stages of an assignment and you want to just go through and do a confirmation of your paper, I always say, look at your introduction. In that first paragraph, are you announcing what your topic is and your thesis? The reader should know what to anticipate based on the first paragraph. And remember, writing is an iterative process. It's recursive. So when you first started writing it, it might have been about something a little bit removed from what you ended up writing about. So that's why I always recommend go back and revisit your introduction and confirm. You announce what your topic is, you announce what your argument is, meaning your thesis, what position is this paper going to take me as the reader? And give a little preview. Think about those movie previews, right? They just say, they introduce some of the main conflict. Apologies for the siren. So when you think about a movie preview, right, they just give you the main ideas, the main conflict, the teasers. So in the body of the introduction, give us a little preview of what are the main characters you're going to introduce to the reader, right? And really, if you come out with a strong introduction and it's compelling, then the reader already is friendly. They're going to be a friendly reader to your work. So that's why it's really important to provide sufficient time to developing your introduction, and that, again, think about that skeleton where there's a whole alignment going on. So if the introduction is the head, everything that follows should be incongruous with the rest of the shape of that particular body.
So am I questions?
Yes.
Okay. So are you going to talk about later about the thesis or not really?
No, but you and I can talk about it.
Okay.
We can talk about it. Yeah. Do you have a question right now for me? Because we can talk about it.
Afterwards?
Now or after?
Okay. So if you don't mind, the truth is I've been off the school for more than 15 years. So I'm back in writing, and the thesis concept is not very clear to me. As for where do you exactly place it within the introduction?
Okay. I wish that I had a really good example with me, but I might find one later and email it to you. I always suggest that it should be the first or second sentence. The thesis should be the first or second sentence. If it's the second sentence, the first sentence should touch on something that is preparing the reader for the thesis. So for instance, if we were talking about something topical, maybe we're talking about the coronavirus, the first sentence might be vague, but still about the topic. It might be people have been dealing with the outcomes of a pandemic for almost 2 years. That could be the first sentence. And then the second sentence would be the thesis. However, they're not out of the woods. I would argue that we're looking at another year of dealing with masking and quarantining and travel restrictions. And then I know as the reader, okay, she's going to be taking the position that we're not out of the woods, that she's going to go into some examples to support the idea that the pandemic we're not close to being over. Now, somebody else might have done different research and might have a different position and might say, by February, there'll be no more pandemic. Does that help?
Yes. So yes, very much, because I didn't know if it was after the first paragraph or at the end of the introduction. So right at the beginning.
Right. I would say for academic papers, like a 10-page paper or a 20-page paper, it should really come very soon. If you were writing a book, the introduction would be a chapter, and you might provide a lot of context and history and all kinds of information before you actually say the thesis. But I'm imagining that the average paper you're writing is between 15 and 20 pages.
Yes, it's 15.
Okay. All right. So it's fine to have it the second sentence, the first sentence, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, even if it's a case study?
Yeah, I would, I mean, it really is, again, some of these things are a little, they depend. If you think that, let's say, for instance, you have something that's a very radical thesis, and I, I always default to what does the reader need, right? What is the reader gonna need to know to be prepared for what I'm about to tell them?
Okay.
And, you know, it's no different than communicating with anybody. If you think about, there are things that, let's say you're going to tell a coworker versus something you're going to tell, you know, someone who is, you know, is works, does cooperate with you or collaborate with you, but doesn't intimately know
Okay.
your job. You have to sort of weigh that, and how much does this person need to know before I tell them my point?
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. And that was a great question, and jump in with any of those questions. We can just treat it like a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, paraphrase. So a conclusion is you want to paraphrase your thesis. Sometimes I see people just verbatim restate the thesis. You don't really want to do that. Again, you're having a conversation with a reader, and you've provided pages of information and research and a case that come up with another way of saying your argument, you know, and it's just a more nuanced way of articulating the point that you started at the beginning of the paper, right? So and so treat it like that. And again, in the beginning, you did the highlights of what are my supporting ideas. And again, for the reader, here in the conclusion, what you can do is you don't just list what your supporting ideas were, but articulate what was the relationship between them, right? So let's say if we're using the pandemic experience again, you know, there was a reason that one idea came first and another idea and then another idea. And so explain that. So, you know, although people have been vaccinated, we have not mitigated risk against mutation. And so you start to, you know, the things that you talked about in the paper, in the conclusion, just express what was the relationship between point A, point B, point C. And then one of the things that I always appreciate is when the writer can kind of put things into a broader perspective, right? So, you know, maybe there's a situation that's specific just to a local area, but you say, you know, let's say homelessness, you know, and in San Diego, and you discussed it at length, and then you make the case that if an urban metropolitan area such as San Diego is unable, with all the resources it has, to effectively address homelessness, what are the chances that the majority of the rest of the country is going to be able to handle the housing crisis and the inevitable homelessness? You know, and so then the reader's like, wow, yeah, I get it. I get why this is there's some imperative to trying to address the issues. And that's also a way for you to address implications. So very often people have a position and there's action being, people are called to do some kind of action one way or the other, right? In the conclusion is a really good place to, I always think of it as sort of editorializing, like, well, if we don't do anything about an issue, what are the implications? And you could spell it out there. You know, if we don't address climate change, what are the implications, right? So maybe your paper was all about innovative ways to address climate change, and you've laid them out, and there are costs and sacrifices involved in each one of them. But you end your paper what happens, the cost and the sacrifices, it'll be asked if people don't do anything. Do you have any questions about conclusions?
When you're saying naming like that, what are the implications to not addressing these problems, for instance? And do I actually name the implications, or do I not talk specifically about those implications? I don't know if you understand.
I think that you can talk about the implications. So you know, I'm in the field of education, and I think about the issue that there are more and more children being diagnosed with special needs. And I could be writing a whole paper about how everybody getting a teacher credential should be required to have content knowledge in teaching special education. And my whole paper could be about that. And then in my conclusion, I could start to say, you know, with the population being, you know, 40 million new births every whatever, if we're not addressing this by the year 2025, we'll have X number of students who are not receiving the resources that have been determined are necessary for their academic growth.
Okay, that was my point. If I could mention specific numbers or ideas.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. No, that
I didn't mention anything about that during the body of the paper.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the conclusion, as you can, like, in the body, you really want to stick to the, you know, the evidence. In the conclusion, you can kind of predict, if nothing happens, based on all the evidence that I've given you so far, if nothing happens, no change is made, this is what we could potentially end up with.
Okay. I have another question, but I don't know if it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I kind of struggle once I'm writing, because I typically write as I think I would speak, and it's not the correct thing to do, I know, but I want to give my opinion at every time I'm writing a paragraph. I know I'm not allowed to talk about my opinion every time I write a paragraph. Where do exactly can I write whatever I think?
Well, it is often a impulse to do that, and
I'm a woman.
yeah, the best place I would say is in the conclusion, at the end of the paper, because if you're doing it at the beginning of the paper without substantiation of all of the research, it sounds like your opinion. And that's what is really important about these graduate programs and writing for a profession, is that you're earning a degree on expertise based on research. And so your opinion about something should not make an appearance. What you can advocate for, what you can argue is, this is what the research shows. This is what the evidence has demonstrated.
Okay.
Yeah, that's but I get it. And when we're at the early stages of writing, that can be really good fuel for ideas, right? Because you're having a visceral response to something that you want to address, resolve, or get other people excited about. So it's all fine, but as long as you can, before you submit this assignment, convert that into something that has been backed up with research.
Okay.
I I am I often hear other people very, very, very often giving me all of their opinions and feelings about education. And they're what we use the term layman. Do you know that expression?
Yeah.
It means like the person who's doesn't have information about a topic. It's like, well, I wish I knew the actual definition of layman, but it means somebody who's kind of uninformed about the topic. So the layman, right, versus somebody with a PhD in education who teaches
Okay.
this and reads the journals and knows all the research, right? Versus like, your next door neighbor who maybe that person's a lawyer, but they don't know anything about how public education works, but they have feelings, they have thoughts, they have opinions. Sometimes when I'm in those conversations with people, I will say, listen, these are not my feelings I'm talking to you about when I'm addressing what's going on with a charter school. This is the research. This is what the research is saying about charter schools. My feelings about them are, they fall into a different category, but I'm just telling you what the research is. And that's what you should be doing.
Okay, another question, I'm sorry. So
Right.
when the teacher says that within the paper, I need to make a connection with the other topics of the class, other
Mhm.
readings,
Mhm.
other presentations, within the body, I'm supposed to write, this makes me think of the book of blah, 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 or this makes me think of
Yeah.
class, blah, blah, blah. But just
Yeah.
comment on that idea, but not say, this makes me think and it makes me feel like.
Right.
So I should avoid the feeling like.
Yeah,
And
and I have a whole slide on that.
okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going ahead.
No. I do have a slide on that. What you would say is, and this is terrific, you would connect them. So let's say you were talking about the climate change, and you could say, several researchers have addressed climate change from the same position. And then you would have a parenthetical, the in-text citation, and you would have the names of who those people were. And they were maybe people from your class, what you read, right? Yeah. So you would just connect them. So
Okay.
so your work isn't happening in isolation. That's another thing to keep in mind, that the ideas that you're developing are a synthesis of work that you found on your own and work that happened in the class, and you're showing that you can weave these things together and make a case for something.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Topic sentences. So again, this is, what are those handful of things that you can do just to sort of the final, I don't watch NASCAR racing, but I know that cars zip into these little stations and they go around with the drill and they make sure everything's tight, that the wheels aren't going to go flying off. So these are those kinds of things. You're just going to like zone in on a handful of things and tighten them up. So you want to make sure that your paragraphs, that every paragraph has a topic sentence, and that the topic sentence is the first or second sentence of the paragraph. What I'm saying is the first sentence shouldn't be a quote. When you're using a quote, you are going to give us some sort of preface, right? as research has shown, and then there's the quote, or some context for it, right? So your first sentence is either going to be an introduction to a new idea. I'm segueing to a new idea. And then what is this whole paragraph about, right? Here, I'm going to argue that a reliance on fossil fuels is detrimental to long-term goals of eradicating climate change. And then everything in there, all the research, all the quotes, all of the data has to be about the fossil fuel and its impact on climate change. And it seems so obvious, right? But again, as we're writing, ideas don't come to us purely logically in a beautifully arranged format. You know, things just come flying at us and we write things down. And later we got to move them around and move them around. And so that's why you want to make sure that nothing got moved into the wrong place. You know, sometimes I'll read a paragraph and I'll think, you know what, there are two main ideas in this paragraph. This should have been two paragraphs. And so read your work, read that paragraph. What is this paragraph? Or was this a paragraph where you were kind of thinking, but you weren't shaping? And there's a difference. You could have a lot of unrelated tangential thoughts that still need some shaping. And so if you have a very clear topic sentence and you say, okay, this sentence is only supposed to be about this. Is that what it's about? Okay, great. And then go on to the next one. And then also be sure that you're showing the relationship between the ideas. So you'll want to have some transitional words. Maybe you're using something that is supporting the previous idea, or maybe you're saying something that contrasts the previous idea, but it's still related to your main topic. So just make sure that you're showing those, think of them like signposts, right? So like, here's a signpost or a street light, you know, it's green, keep going, you know. Here's something else where, you know, research is inconclusive about blah, 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 blah. However, it's still worth recognizing, considering, and so forth. So think about your transitional words.
Okay, these transitional words that you're talking about, it has to be within every paragraph of, or even in the same, I mean, from paragraph to paragraph or in the same one?
It's helpful to think about it paragraph to paragraph. Although within a paragraph, you might have transitional words. You know, you might be showing how two researchers are looking at the same topic. But you know, it kind of, you know, again, whatever the context is will dictate, but it is a good idea that a paragraph doesn't just sort of have a cold start, you know, like you should not be able to just pick up a paragraph and move it to anywhere in the paper. There should be a linkage between each paragraph. They're strung together for a purpose. If they're just in there and they can be moved around like a module randomly, then your paper's missing a really important feature, which is the coherence. So you might be starting off with like the least important topic, and then moving into bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to like the biggest part of it. Or you could do the opposite, or maybe you're doing something along a timeline, you know, at the beginning, this is what we understood about climate change, and this is how it has evolved. There's some controlling, organizing feature to what you're writing.
Okay.
Yeah, and if paragraphs can just randomly be placed, then the controlling, organizing feature is missing. All right. Okay, conciseness. This is where I get very nitty-gritty. I think that conciseness can make a profound difference in the sentence level of your work. It can make your work it can change the tone of your work and give it more of a sort of an academic scholarly tone. And it just works with precision because it eliminates some of these crutch words that we use, and there are quite a lot of them. So I'm going to go through them. And one of the things I like to tell students is you keep this list with you when you're doing your final edits, and go through and see if you can find these, I call them the culprits, because they undermine your conciseness. And sometimes you're in a situation, for instance, I submitted a conference proposal and it could only be 300 words. It's hard to fit something into 300 words, but I know what words to zero in on. And if I remove them, I can shrink the sentence. And the ideas are stronger because there's not as much filler in there that takes up space but doesn't actually say anything. So I'm going to start off with the topic that you talked about. I think, I feel, in my opinion, I believe. They do not have a place in your academic writing.
Not even in the conclusion?
Not what?
Not even in the conclusion?
No, I would suggest not to. You're writing the paper. So I know everything in this paper is based on your perspective. So I don't need to see you say, I believe. What I would like to see is strong cases can be made for how to mitigate climate change based on the work of blah, 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 blah. And that's your opinion, that's your belief. But by not saying that, you're really shifting the attention to the research. And that's where the attention should be. And your role was, as the writer, your role was to synthesize all the different research. And you saw it in a unique way. Not everyone's paper is going to be the same paper. The way that the position that you took and the way that you arranged the ideas and the arguments that you made, that was all you. So I don't need any of the, I believe, in my opinion, I think, I feel. It's completely unnecessary. And I'll give you some examples, right? This is a real sentence. I think that college has in some ways become unappealing to people because they feel forced to major in something they're not interested in just to make the big bucks. So it's 30 words. And I know what the author is saying, but it's a lot of words to get to an idea. You can start with your topic. And again, like I was saying, if you wanted to, do a fast edit, if you just do a word search in the document for think and go to each one of those sentences where you have think, believe, feel, and you change it where the topic is the beginning of the sentence, you've already improved that paper. It already sounds more scholarly.
Okay.
So the new sentence is, college has in some ways become unappealing. And so now it's a shorter, more direct, emphatic sentence. Okay.
Sorry, did you ask the question? I kind of lost you.
Yeah.
No. Did you ask the question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's okay. And then my other favorite, I call these tiny words. They're the prepositions. And you know the prepositions. They're those tiny, tiny words, right? But we abuse these words and they make writing a little more convoluted and wordy. And most of the time you can eliminate them, or you can make it your aspiration to minimize how much you use them. So again, if you wanted to just do a word search, when I was trying to put that proposal together, I did a word search for some of these words and I found them and I took them out, and then I made my 300 word maximum. Okay. So I'll give you again a couple of examples. So that sentence that we looked at earlier, one of the things that makes it wordy are these tiny words. So you have has in, you have unappealing to, you have forced to, major in, interested in, to make. And if you're wanting to revise your work, you say to yourself, I don't really know where to start. My suggestion is start with all the tiny words, because if you have to eliminate them, what you're going to be left with are meaningful substantive words, which will convey to the reader what your point is. You want the reader to be focused on what your argument is or your point, not on trying to figure out what you're saying. So here's the sentence without the tiny words. And you'll notice that it does change. And this is part of that. If you go back to the schematic, or that the image I had of the writing process, going and folding back in and then going out a little further and then folding back in. So here's a sentence where if you're just dumping all your ideas down, and you shouldn't be thinking about making it a perfect sentence. Get the idea out, make it a perfect sentence in another stage. And here the author goes back and says, okay, I'm going to edit this. I got all the ideas out. I want to say, how am I going to clean this up? So I'm going to take out, I think. I'm going to take out so many of those tiny words. And I'm going to pay attention to using precise language. So instead of saying, major in something they're not interested in, blah, blah, how can I say it more eloquently? And they say, so some people feel pressured to select a less desirable major with a more lucrative career path. And there they have this parallelism, less and more. It's a more elegant sentence. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the sentence?
Yes, it looks much better, and you understand what he's trying to say better.
Using more concrete language, right? And the first sentence is great for getting the idea down on the page. Then you got to go in and you have to move things around and use new words for the same idea. The concept hasn't changed, but the language has, the expression has.
So, as an advice, do you think it's a good idea? You were talking about how sometimes you write and maybe you don't use the correct words at that moment, but you just want to take off your ideas of your mind. Is it okay just to write and write, and then at the end go back and start writing? When you
I do another workshop. It's about getting started. It's about when people are stuck, and it's all the strategies for getting started. And there is a field of research on the topic of free writing. And one of the reasons that some research says that one of the reasons that people struggle with writing is that they're editing themselves instead of just releasing the ideas onto the page without editing, knowing that, okay, I am going to go back and clean this up, right? I can make this as messy because no one is going to read that. This is just for me to sort of unburden the ideas onto a page. It's not for the reader yet. This is for me. And then you go back in and you polish and you move things around, and you do different, you do the work, you do the editing and the revision and the editing.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for bearing with me. I just such a beginner in writing that anything that you say, I'm just taking notes. I'm so happy I took the.
I will, thank you. I will also share the video with you and the slides. So you'll have the slides so that you could have maybe a screenshot or something of the tiny words. So it'll remind you, okay, I'm almost done with my paper. The next stage of this paper is I'm going to go and look at these little words, so you'll be able to have some of these at your fingertips, right? But you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, we haven't done a great job of demystifying what is the writing process. And your professors aren't writing professors, they're experts in their field and they're very good at what they do. And so what we're trying to do with the Writing Center is to make people more comfortable with the writing process by understanding that, first of all, it is a process and that anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. It just needs to be explained.
You're right. So at the beginning, that once you start writing, then you get better. I'm so much better now than in August 3 months ago. So I'm happy I'm learning.
So another one of the culprits that interferes with having concise language are adverbs. And one of the things I used to do with my students in the first year composition classes, have them read something that's more of a scholarly work, more of a social science research based, and have them count how many times they find a word that ends in ly. And they don't. Because in academic, scholarly, or research-based work, it's just unnecessary. It's overkill or filler. It really interferes with more of an objective tone, right? So the social sciences or scholarly work is really focused on the research, right? So you don't need to say or have words like actually or really or truly, because you're going to let the data or the research do that work for you. You're not going to rely on adjectives to try to convince somebody, right? And let me show you a couple of examples to see if it helps. So here's an example from a student. So the first sentence of a paper was, climate change is actually humanity's greatest challenge. Now, again, I said, if you could just go through your work and eliminate every word that ends with ly, you're doing yourself a favor. Already the paper is going to be better. So what could we do? What could we do? Climate change is humanity's most. There are so many words that could replace. Do any come to mind right now for you?
Biggest.
Biggest. Any others? You know what is great? We know what I do is I go and do a search for biggest or big and synonym, and I see what comes up. Do you ever do that?
Yes, in Word, I always go to the synonyms and change it.
Yes, right. And so what you might see, so if you want to say that in terms of heft and size, but maybe you also want to say something about, there are big problems, and then there are problems that are like need fixing right now. So there's another
threatening,
threatening. Yes, any of these are better. Urgent, pressing, critical. Any of those are better than actually.
Yes.
What does actually communicate?
Nothing.
And so that's why go through your paper, look at the actuallys, What could you say instead? Okay. The other words are words that end in ing or tion. They often require a helping verb or added prepositions. And because of that, the sentence can become bloated. So I always say, do a word search for ing, tion, and ask yourself, how could I make the sentence a little more refined, a little less wordy, if I got rid of that word. So for instance, very basic example, she is running daily. If you're using ing, you're going to most likely need to have one of those helping verbs, the is, are, right? So what could you do instead? Just use the verb runs. Just use the verb. So you could, go through your paper and look for places where there's a verb, a helping verb instead of the actual verb. And again, if you're trying to submit a proposal with a midnight deadline and you need to get rid of one word, runs daily will do it as opposed to is running daily. Okay. Here's another less, basic example. So this is a perfectly fine sentence, but it could be further refined. So in order for frameworks such as culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally competent to work, teachers must have training on how to participate in the implementation of strategies. So let's say I'm really close to finished. I did a search for ing words and tion words, and I'm looking at this and I go, oh my gosh, I see the helping verb have training. And then I see all those tiny words on, to, in, of. How can I restructure this sentence? How can I know what I want to say, but is there a way to move things around so that it's a very sort of a sharper, cleaner sentence?
Much better.
Yeah, it is. Because now we know who needs to do what. The school district. And that was missing in the other sentence. We were kind of walking around who was needing to do what. But in this sentence, and if you have to play with the words and play with the words, and then finally you'll go, oh, I know, and it'll occur to you. Right. So now we have somebody doing the action. The school district is doing the training, and the teachers will implement. Right. And those are just the verbs. And that's much more helpful to the reader too. Are you familiar with the term passive voice?
Yes.
Okay, great. So a lot of academic writing for decades used passive voice. It was just sort of the default. It makes for very awkward language. And personally, I struggle sometimes with figuring out what is going on. To me, the passive voice interferes with comprehension because it never says who the action is performed by. It just says the action happened. And so we've also stylistically have caught up with the fact that there's no need to use this couched passive voice language, and APA format is encouraging writers to use active voice. So here's an example, and these are all real examples. So the data tool used in this research was drawn from data that was collected from an interview with 5 open-ended questions. Now, for somebody who hasn't studied writing, I don't expect them to look at the sentence and know how to fix it. But I would expect most people to read that sentence a couple of times to try to figure out what's going on. And you want to do your reader a favor. You want to make the reading flow and be an easy reading, you know? And so if I've explained to you, go through your work and look for where there's passive voice. And how do you know that? Whenever you're using the past tense, often it can be. If you didn't say who did what. So the data tool used in this research was drawn from data that was collected. I don't know this is like all disembodied action. So how do we revise it? The researchers collected data from interviews consisting of 5 open-ended questions.
Yes, you understand it faster. You only have to read that once to understand what you're trying to say.
You understand it faster. And notice this used and was, these helping verbs, right? Again, it's just this one little trick. If you only had time to search for one thing, search for the helping verbs and make the sentence stronger.
Okay.
All right. Here's another one. As the education field becomes more inclusive and takes into account the varying levels and learning styles, new methods of teaching are being experimented with. Now, again, I don't expect people who haven't studied English the way that I have to understand what's the issue with this sentence. My secret that I'm sharing with people is search your work for the word being, B-E-I-N-G. Search for it, and I guarantee you that sentence can be improved. And again, it comes down to the passive voice. Teachers are the ones experimenting. Methods aren't just being experimented with. Someone's doing the experimenting. Teachers are experimenting with new methods of teaching. Okay. And then these are those helping verbs. If you wanted to go through your paper, am, is, are, was, were, being and been. Being and been to me are the ones that are most problematic. And I do search my work for being and been, because I know that if I just invested a little bit of time, I'll find a more direct, descriptive way of expressing what I want to express. It's fine when I'm in the early stages of writing. Use all of these words, do all of this stuff, but later just know, okay, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to tinker with those words. So my tip though is, like, when you're going in to search for those words, what are you going to replace them with? A strong descriptive verb. So some students are afraid of notebook checks. So this came from a student who was doing observations of elementary schools. And she was looking at the climate in the classroom. And so she had written that some students are afraid of notebook checks. And so I wrote back to her, I said, well, what could you change if you could convey this same idea, how could you change it? Don't use the word are. And she worked on it and she worked on it. And she came up with, some students fear notebook checks. And that's much more powerful. Right. So that's just one of those tips about look for these little words, ask yourself what one verb I can use instead. We've looked at this one already. So instead of saying are getting, you can increase, what are you saying? And then there is, you change that up as well. So just doing a search for those little words, for the helping verb and the ing, and it'll focus your attention on a sentence, and you'll be compelled to want to change it up a little bit and make it a stronger, more descriptive, specific kind of sentence. And your reader will appreciate it. Okay. Let's go on to, here's another example where, again, I said, go through your work and look for the helping verbs, or look for the, just the, those small verbs. And instead of saying that the student's body language was stiff, she changed it and she wrote, I noticed the students stiffened their body language and they avoided eye contact with their teacher. And now you can kind of get more of a visual picture of what's happening, as opposed to the was stiff and had been refraining from making eye contact. Instead of saying, again, if you search for that word been, you'll come to this sentence, you'll say, what am I supposed to do with this sentence? Instead of saying had been refraining from, avoided. Or students refrained. You didn't need has been refraining.
Okay.
Okay. This one, just looking for little words, it is the governor who signs or vetoes. The governor signs. That's all you need. The governor signs. And the other example we looked at earlier, instead of are getting and there is, we just say what it is. All right. Vague pronouns. This is one of my big bugaboos. I don't, I think that there is an abuse of pronouns in our work, and it's fine when we're only writing for ourselves to get our ideas out. But if we're writing for someone else, they can't always know when you write it or this or that, what you're referring to. And the grammatical policy is that the pronoun has to directly follow what they call the antecedent, meaning the subject. So if you say, Paloma drove to school today, she parked her car on the west side of campus, we know that it's Paloma. But if you go a couple of sentences in between those, and then you start a sentence with she, I can't be guaranteed who you're talking about because you didn't directly follow the subject. So another, I think, tip is to search your work for pronouns. It, this, that. Are you starting sentences with those pronouns? Is it explicitly clear what you're referring to with that vague pronoun? Here's a sentence. It is obvious that LGBTQIA students, staff, and families have the greatest stake in schools creating inclusive climates. Two pronouns right there, it and that. If you're doing a search and just for those words, already you could just start with your topic. And this is great. If you're starting with your topic, then the reader can't lose focus. So the LGBTQIA students, staff, and families have the greatest stake in schools creating inclusive climates.
Mhm.
No confusion. Nobody can get confused. And here's another similar kind of example. These teaching strategies, this leads, this requires. I don't know what this is, right? I suppose that they're talking about the strategies for inclusive and understanding of a student's disability, but why not name what we're talking about? So instead of, and I write to the student, I say, well, instead of this, what would you substitute here? And I try to train the student to do that for themselves, because the following sentence is also this. And you want to keep forefront of the reader's mind, what are you talking about? And so if this person is writing about different special education techniques to enhance learning, say that, say these enhanced techniques lead to understanding. These behavior modification practices require teachers to have a more in-depth understanding. Say what you're talking about. And what did we change it to here? Teachers need to discern. Acquiring knowledge will help teachers respond appropriately. It's just good. But again, fine when you're writing for yourself in your draft mode, getting the ideas out, because you know what these things are. Now I'm just saying, before you turn the paper in, confirm what it is you're talking about, and make sure that the reader cannot misinterpret, can't get confused, doesn't have to read a sentence a couple of times to understand what's going on. The last tip around conciseness is when you have vague words, okay? This is, when you have the luxury of time and you can interrogate every word in the sentence, is every word working for you? That's what this one is about, word choice. So the first example is the politician talked about several of the merits of after-school programs in his speech. About several of, again, like if you're following my advice and you search for prepositions, you'll see about, of. Ask yourself, how can I change that? What did the politician really do? Touted, praised, expressed gratitude. So that's what you push yourself into this understanding of what to focus on, what to look for in the sentence. And it really actually makes the editing process faster, because if you do this list and I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, the paper gets so much better and much faster than if you just start at the beginning and you're just kind of going through it. All right, let's see. Oh, right. So here's one of those, activities I was talking about earlier. As reported by Inside Higher Education, students were told by the university administrator that tuition would be increased by 3%. So now if I had said, okay, go through, search for prepositions, search for tiny words, search for passive voice, the sentence changes. So passive voice was were told. Who told them? The helping verbs, if you're looking for be, being, been, change that. And word choice. Announced. Instead of told, were told. You can have announced, right? And now you have 12 words instead of 20.
What was wrong about the told word? The word choice, what was that?
So it's passive language, we're
Oh, that's
told. Yeah,
okay.
we
Yes.
don't know. We don't know. You do know that university administration told them, but it comes after. Why not? University administrators told students.
Okay. It's not that told. It's not a word that could be used. It's the subject that wasn't very well described. Okay.
Right. And it had the by, and that's one of those prepositions. And if you're searching to eliminate a preposition, means you have to put the subject first, followed by the verb, followed by the object.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the list. You can keep, as I said, I'll share these slides with you and you can have that little list as a screensaver to remind you what to look for in the future. The last strategy I have for, making your final paper look in the fashion that was expected for scholarly academic work. Whatever the guidelines are, the formatting guidelines for your discipline. So I know that in my school, we use APA. Others, people in the humanities use MLA, people in medicine use something else, and so on and so forth. So just check that you're following the format. So if it's that the margins and the headers have to be a certain font and a certain number of inches, do that. Read the work to make sure that you have included all of your sources, that you put the citation and cite it where the idea came from. That's important. Make sure that the in-text citation is done correctly according to whatever guidelines you're supposed to follow. So is it first name, year, or I'm sorry, last name and year, or last name, first initial and year, or last name page, because you did a direct quote, just make sure you've got that correct. And then I always recommend proofreading the reference page or submitting it to the Souls Graduate Student Writing Center. A lot of us are using different software that will generate a citation for us. So we might be downloading the citation into, what are some of those programs now? EndNote, for instance, or RefWorks, or one of those, or you're just exporting it from the library itself and saving it somewhere. The problem is that those programs are not fail safe, and sometimes they might not have you're using a journal, so the journal article has to be, the title of it has to be formatted one way, the title of the article, and then the title of the journal is formatted a different way. And so it is always a good idea to read that reference list yourself or have someone else look at it to make sure that whatever you exported actually did, it does have the proper formatting. I've been caught myself that way. And let's see. So resources, there's the Souls Graduate Student Writing Center, and students can submit their work 3 times a semester. They get about, a writing coach can spend 2 hours on your work, give you track changes, and then set up a conference for up to an hour to walk you through the changes. If you're using Microsoft Word, I know for sure that they have a read aloud feature, and that's been helpful to me sometimes too. When I'm short on time, I just turn on the read aloud and it reads the paper, and I'll hear, oh my gosh, I missed, just today I wrote down office instead of official. So it can be helpful. Of course, use spell check. Those red squiggly lines mean something. There's a hyperlink in here that'll take you to the APA style guide. I'm not sure if that's what you're using, but if it is, there's a link there. And then I think getting somebody who can be, a critical friend who can read your work and give you some feedback about the content and the structure, and the development of your ideas. So if you tell somebody, I really need you to tell me, did I fully develop this idea? Does the structure make sense to you in terms of point A, point B, point C? Um, it can be really useful because sometimes we are too close to the work to see the work a little more objectively. So getting that kind of feedback can be helpful. And that is the end, but I'm really happy to talk. If you have any questions or anything, you can stop recording.
Thank you. I'm so